Hey everyone, it's Corona from the Headphone Show. Today with me I have, no, not a handbag even though it looks like it a little bit. It's actually a headphone and it's the Apple Airpods Max. Let's check them out. Okay, so of course Apple is no stranger to designing headphones. We've seen their immensely popular AirPods as well as the also very popular AirPods Pro. This is the AirPods Max then, which is their luxury over-ear offering. And this is the first over-ear headphone we've ever seen from Apple. Now, this retails at $550, which if you're familiar with the wireless ANC market, this is definitely on the higher end of the spectrum. But we'll find out to see how it performs, if there's anything that it brings to the table that is offering an edge over its competitors, and also what sort of features it has. So, as always, we'll start off by checking out the accessories. Included with the AirPods Max aren't really that many accessories. You get a Lightning to USB-C cable for charging the headphone, but you don't get a wall power adapter. And then you get the smart case, which will be of a matching color to the headphone. So in this case, I have the green one because, well, the headphone's green. The smart case, as you can see, it doesn't really offer that much protection for the headphone. The headband is exposed, but at least it should help with reducing the scratching of the ear cups, which are made out of metal. And one more feature that it has is that according to Apple, when you put the AirPods Max into this smart case, it throws the headphone into ultra low power state, which should preserve battery life. Moving on to build and comfort, I gotta say that this is hands down my favorite build of any of the wireless ANC headphones I've reviewed. All the other ones have featured mainly plastic builds. You do have usually like metal headbands, or you'll see like the outer metal headband and very rigid plastic on something like the Momentum 3, but I don't think that really matches an all metal build like you get on the AirPods Max. It's just a headphone that feels extremely premium and solid in the hands, and I don't see this breaking down anytime soon. So yeah, it's a $550 price tag, but at least it feels like a very high quality product. Now, the all metal build might bring some comfort concerns for some users, as since it's made entirely out of metal, that means that yes, this headphone is significantly heavier than a lot of its competitors. So this weighs in at around 384 grams, whereas something like the WH-1000XM4 is around the 250, 260 mark. And for me personally, weight hasn't been an issue, but I know that for some users, especially those who are sensitive to like the headphone's weight, that might cause some concerns. But this headband design that they've gone for here, I find that it at least does a pretty decent job at distributing the weight. It just, at least for me, it did just slightly created a pressure point at like around the center of my head. But other than that, it's a very comfortable headphone. The pads are actually quite deep and their opening is actually quite large, which is surprising because a lot of these headphones that are wireless ANC, they're supposed to be over or around the ear, but they tend to be a little bit small, like, and could be almost on ear for some listeners, but that's not the case with the AirPods Max. I feel like these pads will definitely fit as an around ear or over ear headphone for almost, if not all, listeners. So just a very comfortable headphone overall. Moving on to features, there's not really a lot to cover here. So if you look at the headphone itself, it only has two buttons, which are on the right ear cup. So they're here at the top. You might be able to see them, maybe not. So on the rear side of the right ear cup, we have a dial that looks sort of like the crown from the Apple Watch, if you're familiar with those, but it's quite a bit bigger. And that acts as your media control. So you can turn the dial for volume up and down. You can press it once to pause and play music or answer calls or hang up. And then you can double tap it to fast forward or triple tap it to rewind. And then the other button we have here is actually, if you hold it down, that's for resetting or pairing the headphone. And it's also for choosing between the two different sound isolation modes. So you have the transparency mode that we'll talk about in a second, and you also have the noise canceling. Now, most features will actually be on the iOS device that you use itself. So we'll start off by checking out the controls in the command center. So if you open your iPhone's or iPad's command center and you hold down on the volume setting, you can see that we have two different options for the AirPods Max. The first one of which is noise control. So in noise control, we have three settings. We have noise cancellation on, which of course enables noise canceling to be on, which means that it's gonna block out external sound. And then we have transparency mode, which actually mixes in external audio into your headphones sound mix so that you have better physical spatial awareness of what is actually around you. Now, and then we have off, which, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. Then we also have the spatial audio settings. Now, spatial audio, it's a sort of soundstage enhancing feature, not unlike a DTS-X, 7.1 surround sound, that kind of stuff. But I actually find that it's pretty effective on the AirPods Max as well as on the AirPods Pro. If you have the earbuds, you also get this feature. And there's two different settings here. You have fixed, which this is a bit confusing. So if you set it to fixed, it will enhance the soundstage, make it more immersive and expansive, but it doesn't matter how you move your head, the soundstage will move with you. So let's say a vocalist is center in the mix, it'll always be center regardless of where you actually face your head. With Head Tracked, this is actually the one that does have a fixed soundstage, because let's say a vocalist is center, and then you turn your head to the left. That means that now the vocalist will no longer sound like it's centered, but instead will be coming from the right. So those are your settings for spatial audio. And then actually you have off, which again, it just goes back to being stereo or mono sound, depending on the audio source that you're listening to. Then if you go to your device's settings and you go to Bluetooth and then select the AirPods Max, you get to see again the options for noise control. You also get to choose what the button cycle does on the physical headphone itself. So by default, it just cycles between noise cancellation and transparency mode, but you can also add in to have the off function for noise canceling to be part of the features on the button. Then you can also change the direction of the digital crown. So by default, it's actually set to increase volume. You go counterclockwise, which for me was a little awkward. So you actually get to change it if you don't like that here on the settings. And then you also have things like automatic head detection for, play, pause, and when you take on and off the headphone. And then you also have the spatial audio settings. Then lastly, again, under the iPhone settings, if you scroll down and go to the music app settings, you'll see that there's an EQ button. Now, this gives you access to a whole slew of EQ presets that work with any headphone, but since we're talking about the AirPods Max here, I just thought I'd mention it. Now, one thing to note is that these EQ presets only work if you're using the Apple Music app, except for one preset, and this one's really strange. If you choose the late night preset, that actually applies universally. So it doesn't matter if you're using Tidal or Spotify or just watching YouTube, that EQ preset will actually change the frequency response of the AirPods Max, but all the other ones only work when using Apple Music. And we'll talk a little bit more about the late night preset later on in the video. Okay, so that was a lot to cover, but we finally get to talk about sound. And I gotta say, I was quite surprised with the AirPods Max. So out of the box, I think that these might be one of the best sounding ANC wireless headphones that I've heard, because they have a very, very enjoyable tonal balance. And the other only headphone that I've really thought performed really well for frequency response out of the box was the Sennheiser Momentum Wireless 3. Now, they're both quite different because the AirPods Max, I think I would describe it as being the much more lush sounding and warmer sounding headphone, but it's also the one that I actually think is a little bit more balanced, and we'll get into that now. So as always, we'll start off talking about the bass, and this is what I think is one of the best attributes on the AirPods Max. It might just have the best bass response I've heard from a wireless ANC headphone, and there's a few reasons for that. The first one is that it actually has pretty good bass extension. I feel like it extends all the way down to 20 Hertz, and there was really no roll-off that I could hear, so I'm getting the sub-bass depth and rumble that I want to hear. And then the other thing is the bass shelf. The bass shelf gets two things right. The first one is that it's not blown out of proportion like it is on a lot of the other wireless ANC headphones, to the point where you can't really enjoy the rest of the mix, like on the Sony XM4. But it's still very present. You get a lot of thump, you get a lot of energy. It's a very fun bass response. But then the other thing is that the bass shelf actually settles around where it should. So it still has a bit of a boost around 140 Hertz, so you do get a slightly warmer mid bass, but you're not getting a boost to the upper bass, which means that you're actually getting a very clean bass to mid-range transition. So to sum it up, I think that the bass response here is excellent. It's very fun, it's enjoyable, It's clean, and I think it's just the best I've heard on an ANC wireless headphone out of the box. Now, as we move towards the mid-range, I'd say that this is the section of the frequency response that actually makes the AirPods Max sound as warm as they do. So between around 300 to 1000 hertz, you have a very present fundamental range. You have a rich body to midtones, but as you move towards the upper mid-range where the ear gain section is, there is a very noticeable dip at around 3 to 4K. So what I would describe it as, or what I would compare it to, is similar to like older Odyssey headphones. I think of like the 2020 LCD2, which has a very recessed upper mid-range. And it's not as recessed as on the Odyssey, but you can tell that it's quite a bit softened up and warmer there. So, vocals sound sort of unnaturally dark, and you also have things like piano overtones, the bite of guitars and brass instruments. They just sound a little bit muted. And what you get is that, yes, you have rich midtones, but then they just sound slightly muffled. It's sort of like they have this congested or somewhat nasally timbre to them. So if you're really allergic to the upper mid-range, then you'll probably really enjoy this. But even for me, and I tend to be sensitive to the upper mid-range region, I feel like I could have had just a little bit more energy there. Now, overall, I don't find it to be offensive. I don't think it's super odd sounding. It's just that, again, I felt like it just could have used a little bit more definition there in those overtones and harmonics that are in that region. As we move into the treble, this probably won't sound that surprising since I just mentioned that it's really the mid-range that makes the headphones sound kind of dark, but I find that the AirPods Max has a very good and present treble range. So the mid and low treble have plenty of energy, and you even get some nice upper treble extension into a region above 10K, so you do have some nice air qualities. The one thing I want to point out is that to me, it sounded as though that there was maybe a bit of a peak at around 6 or 7K. So you do have a slight bit of low treble sibilance. It's not super noticeable, and it's not the harshest or most fatiguing that I've heard, but if it's something that you're sensitive to, then it's something you might want to keep in mind. Okay, so moving on to technical performance, this is where I do feel as though the AirPods Max sees a few drawbacks, and it's not necessarily because it performs worse than its peers. It's really because of its price to performance ratio. So if we look at soundstage, for example, of the ANC headphones that I've tried, so the Bose 700, the QC45, the Sennheiser Momentum 3 wireless, the WH-1000XM4, amongst others, I find that the AirPods Max, even with spatial audio turned off, has the most spacious soundstage. It just conveys a better sense of distance, and its instrument separation, I feel, does a better job at keeping each individual track separated and defined within the mix. And then when you turn spatial audio on, I feel like that's only enhanced further, and it's something a feature that I use a lot, even though it does change the frequency response a little bit. You get slightly more bloated bass because it does boost the upper bass, and you also get a slightly more aggressive mid-treble response. But then for detail retrieval, it's not the internal resolution. I don't feel it quite matches that of the Sennheiser Momentum 3. Now the Momentum 3 you can find, I think, pretty commonly now, because they've been out for a few years, for under $300. And the same can be said for a lot of these other headphones that I've mentioned. And I mean, I do feel as though it's a little bit cleaner sounding than something like the WH-1000XM4, but again, the price to performance ratio there, even for wireless headphones, it's not that impressive. One last thing I wanted to mention before heading into the conclusion of this video was just, again, that late night EQ preset. And the reason I bring it up is because it seems to be glitched or bugged out, and it actually applies universally, as I mentioned earlier. And the other thing is that it actually works really well if the lack of ear gain is a problem for you on this headphone. It works really well at boosting that upper mid-range region. The only caveat here is that it also boosts the treble. So if you already found it to be a little spiky, then you might not be comfortable using the late night preset. But it's one that with certain music I've actually really enjoyed listening to, because it sort of cleans up that slight nasaliness that you get as a result of the warmer upper mids. Okay, so now to wrap up this review on the AirPods Max. They sound very good. I feel like their technical performance is about on par with the other wireless ANC offerings that are in the market, at least the very popular ones. They have a very good build, I think probably the best out of the wireless ANCs. But of course their price tag is quite a bit steeper than the others. And really what it boils down to, at least for me, is what you're paying for is that integration into the Apple ecosystem. So if you're like me, you use an iPhone, you use an iPad, I use a Windows computer at home, but when I'm outside I actually use a MacBook Air. For me, having a product that's so well designed around that specific experience, you know, it just feels like it's an extension of my phone, for example. And that's why I personally use AirPods Pro. So for me, as an Apple user, I'd say like this is the natural go-to headphone. All the features are so much easier to navigate on it than on some other headphones that need external apps or additional apps, like the Momentum 3 Wireless, like the Bose one, and the Sony XM4 also has an app. So I would say that if you're an Apple user and you know you're going to be going outside a lot and you prefer over-ear headphones, the AirPods Max, despite the price tag, I think that's the best option. For anybody else, if you're using like Android, or if you're not, if you don't use too many iOS devices, my second recommendation would go to the Momentum 3 Wireless. That would be like my universal recommendation. Anyways, that is all for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video or found it useful. If you did, do consider dropping a like. If you'd like to learn more about the AirPods Max or many other headphones, I highly encourage you to check out the review section available on headphones.com. For more headphone audio content, stay tuned by subscribing to the Headphone Show here on YouTube. And until next time, this is Chrono signing off.